All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about the stages of clay. The first thing we're going to go over is the difference between the types of clay. So you have the wettest type of clay is called slip. It's just a mixture of water and clay. So right here, if you look into this bucket, that is slip. It's very watery. So if I take it, it's just really watery and gross and nasty. But the cool thing with clay is as long as it's not fired in the kiln, that we can always reuse it. So right now I am reclaiming clay. So if I put this clay on this plaster over here, so you can see that there's this plaster right here. You can't see me, but this will soak up all the water. So I'm gonna take some of this slip, very watery, goopy kind of stuff, and put it on here. And then I'll show you what happens to this, but it'll turn into clay. Sometimes people will put like their fingers in it to kind of help it dry out. But tomorrow or later today, this will be dry enough to go through the pug mill, which you saw on the tour that we did last week. So, clean up my hands real quick and we'll go on to our next stage of clay. All right, so we just learned about slip. That is your wettest stage of clay. The next stage of clay is called plastic. That is what we use to make stuff with. That is what you really work with most of the time. If you're throwing on the pottery wheel, those were those, I pointed those out last week in our tour of the classroom. If you're on there, you want your clay plastic because it makes it easy to use. If you're sculpting something with hand building, you want it plastic. So plastic means it's straight out of the bag, it's ready to use. So we're gonna go over here. We've got some clay that's in bags. And you can even see, I'll grab this bag, where the moisture, you can kind of see, I'm really bad at this camera thing, sorry guys. You can kind of see where the moisture is already in there because this is wet, it's pliable. If I take this out of the bag and put some off, this is what you want. It's not sticky, it's not dirt, it's not goopy anymore. It's not, I'm just gonna come down. It's not sticking to my fingers. If it's sticking to my fingers, it's too wet. And we would have to fix that. So it's not sticky, but you can mold it, you can roll it, you can shape it into anything you want. This is the straight out of the bag is how you want your clay when you start a project, whether it's hand building or on the wheel. So at home, you should be able to have, and at school, this is the clay we'll be using most of the time. It's always what you're gonna start with. If you get a bag of clay and it's harder than this and it's like breaking on you, it's too dry and you need to exchange it for wetter clay through me. All right, so let's move on to our next stage of clay. All right, our next stage of clay is leather hard. If I take this clay and I try to squish it or bend it, it's not as pliable as plastic. Do you see where it's starting to break? That's not good. When it's plastic, I brought some more plastic, I can bend it and it's not gonna break on me because it's pliable. It's got more water. This clay has been sitting out either during the whole class period. Our tables, most of the tables, not all because we're social distancing, but the tables have this backer board on it. And if you leave clay on there too long, it will dry out and become leather hard pretty quickly. My niece was in here yesterday and she was playing around And she just left this on the table and just covered it lightly. And then today when I came back, it's leather hard. Yesterday it was plastic. So we always cover our work lightly, just like she did, so it's ready to use. If you want it to stay really, really wet, she would have needed to wrap it up tightly. So, but another lesson over there that we will reiterate throughout the semester. But back to leather hard. Leather hard, if I take the clay and I bend it, it will break, okay? But the great thing about leather hard is that's when you want to build things and connect things. I make a lot of mugs in my own personal work, and when your pot's leather hard, that's when you want to connect your handles. So if I was connecting two pieces together, let's tilt y'all down to the table. So now you kind of have a good view of the work surface. Everyone will be getting a box of tools when you come to school. And let's just go over quick. I'm gonna make these kind of like small little slabs, and I'm just gonna kind of cut them. You would never make anything for my class this small, but for the purpose of this demo, I just wanna kind of show you what leather hard's all about. So I'm cutting these up into leather hard pieces. So I've got two things. I'm gonna show you how to connect those. So I'm gonna take my serrated rib and I'm going to scratch the corners off of both pieces. And like I said, leather hard's when you wanna connect things. I need some water in my toothbrush to connect. I have a little bit of water in this bowl set aside. In my toolbox, I have a toothbrush. I'm gonna take that water and kind of soften that side. Some people, depending on how hard your piece is, you might want to go back and repeat that step to get it nice and soft. So you're trying to turn that edge that's being connected back into leather hard. And then I'm going to take my pieces and squish them together. And if they're leather hard, they will always, they won't be flappy. If these were plastic squares, they wouldn't stay and they would be flappy. Especially when you work with bigger pieces. Like I said, you'd never make anything this small in my class, but just a quick little lesson. And then I would go through my wooden modeling tool and kind of clean up this seam or add some clay to help that seam out. When we get to slab boxes, we will totally go over that. But leather hard is when you want to connect things. Leather hard is also when you want to carve things. So we've got some cool tools in your box. These are for trimming, but you could also make some nice lines and carve. In my personal work, I use a carving tool to make lots of texture in my pieces with similar tools than this. So some make different lines. And when you get your clay and your tools, feel free to kind of explore what these do. But leather hard is when you want to do that. Because I've got my plastic clay over here still. If I try to carve this now, you see all that nastiness coming up on the side? That's not good. You'll have to go back and clean this up. But if you notice, I use the same tool right here. It's a nice clean sweep. So leather hard is perfect for connecting pieces together and carving. All right, we're gonna go to our next stage of clay. All right, our last stage of clay is, or our last reclaimable stage of clay is bone dry. So if this leather hard stuff I leave out uncovered all night, I can come back tomorrow and it'll be bone dry. It'll turn this white solid color. See the color difference? It is flaky. If I try to carve into it now, it'll be fine. It doesn't really do it. It's like coming off in like dust. You don't want to carve when it's bone dry because it creates a lot of dust. If you breathe that in, you're gonna get like all this dust in your nostrils and you'll like blow your nose later and you're like, that's disgusting. Also, you don't want to breathe it in because it'll get in your lungs. Sometimes potters suffer from like black lung, like coal miners did, because of breathing and all that dust. So you want to make sure that you, especially if you plan on doing this long term, like myself, that you don't breathe. You want to do everything not to breathe in more dust than you have to. So always carve, leather hard, bone dry. This is when we want to fire our work. If I try to fire it when it's wet, it will go boom and explode in the kiln because that moisture hasn't come out. So if you could touch this, it would be warm. It's not cold anymore. The clay, whether it's leather hard or plastic, is cold because of the moisture that is in it. But bone dry is no longer cold, it's more chalky, and it's ready to be fired. Even when if you complete your piece and you forgot to do something, this is when it really sucks, is you've left it out and you forgot to finish it. You can't wet it again because it'll disintegrate in water, which is really awesome for the reclaiming process, because that's what I had to do with some pieces that were left out from last semester that never got finished. Just throw them in a big old bucket of water, and that's why there was so much slip over there that I showed you earlier in this video. And I'll show you right now what's gonna happen. So I'm gonna take this, we'll do it small scale, bone dry clay, and I'm gonna put it in water. As you can see, it's in water. I'm gonna cover it a little bit more so it'll work a little bit faster. And I'm just gonna leave it there. All right, so from that riveting time lapse of clay dissolving in water, you can see, I'm gonna make a mess, but now this clay has turned into slip. And if you remember from the beginning of this video, once it's into slip form, we'll put it in the big slip bucket, and then it'll go on plaster and dry and go to plastic. So anything from slip, plastic, leather hard, bone dry can be reclaimed and go through that beautiful machine over here that I showed you yesterday, or last week, sorry, that you got to see last week on our studio tour. That's the pug mill. That's where we reclaim. As long as it's plastic, goes through that machine, and then it all is kind of good, ready for you to use. So it's pretty cool that bone dry does that. Just add water, disintegrate. Bone dry, I can't go connect leather hard to bone dry because it'll just fall off. No point doing it. Unfortunately, the only way to fix that problem is to start over. But the joy of learning is when you redo something, you've learned something, and it'll be better. So make sure that you, if you don't like to just redo a lot of things, make sure you always cover it up when it is bone dry, because if you just add too much water, it'll just disintegrate and dissolve, and your piece will, you put all this effort trying to fix it when it's not fixable. So make sure you don't get things bone dry until you're ready to turn them in. And we'll go through those procedures later in the semester. All right, so we have those 4 stages: slip, plastic, leather hard, bone dry. That is the 4 stages before you fire a piece of clay. Any of those stages, we can reuse that clay. It's not pottery yet because it hasn't been fired. Once it goes through the kiln one time, it's gonna come out this pinkish color, kind of porous. It's like this pale pink. This is called bisqueware. All right, so bisqueware has been through the kiln one time and fired up to 1800 degrees. That is also known as cone 06. So bis firing is our lower temperature. I know 1800 degrees seems really hot, but in ceramics firing, that is very low temperature to get to this porous bisqueware stage. Bisqueware is ready to be glazed, okay? So we're gonna put like a thin coat of glaze, dip it in. We'll go through glazing at the end of the semester. We're gonna make all our stuff and work really hard, and then we'll glaze stuff towards the end. But pale pink, porous, because glaze is a liquid and a powder mixed together. The porous pottery needs to soak in that liquid, And so just the powder is left, which leads us to the next stage of pottery before it's fired. I'll show you that because we'll have a, I'm sure y'all remember this room from our studio tour, but this is the kiln room. So once your stuff is bisqueware, you'll put glaze on it. And then the glaze will kind of turn powdery. I'm gonna show you a different one. This is students' work. And the bisqueware, you can still see it on the bottom. And then the glaze is on top of it. So this is unfired bisqueware with glaze on it. It's ready for a second firing. Not really a stage of clay. The things you need to know. All right, so your piece has now gone through the kiln the second time. This firing, the clay goes up to 2200 degrees. That is also known as cone 6. At this stage, the glaze starts to melt and turns glass-like. And then you have your finished piece, also known as glazeware. So these student examples. This has already been fired. Your bottom of your pot, your clay that's exposed, you can tell is no longer vitrified, it's solid. If I tried to put glaze on it now, it would just fall off because it's no longer porous. It's not gonna hold that glaze. And the glaze has turned from a powder, has melted into glass. Different sound now as well. It resembles more of glass than clay. But you can kind of shiny, depending on what type of glaze you choose. And then if you have any smears at the bottom that you didn't wipe off, they don't disappear. If you don't wipe them off, they're there forever. So cleaning up and craftsmanship is important. So that is glazeware. What you are familiar with is a finished piece of pottery. That's what that is. So thanks for tuning in and going through our stages. We're gonna review those one more time because that's what we do. Your 4 stages that can be reclaimed are slip, plastic, leather hard, bone dry. After you go through the first firing, goes up to cone 06, 1800 degrees. And then you get bisqueware, light pink. You add some glaze to it, becomes kind of a powdery texture on the outside. Put it in the kiln again. And this time for the second firing, it goes up to cone 6, which is 2200 degrees, and it'll come out as a finished piece of pottery.